Passion, once awakened, is not easily contained. For weeks, Margaret and Daniel had lingered on the edges of something greater, balancing between restraint and desire. But restraint can only hold for so long. And when it finally broke, it was with a force that neither of them could deny. The townhouse nights. The borrowed townhouse on Q Street became their sanctuary. Hidden behind its brick facade and shaded windows, Margaret found a world that belonged only to her and Daniel. Inside, she was not the president's widow. She was Margaret, a woman with laughter in her chest, warmth in her hands, and hunger in her veins. It began simply, a kiss deepening into an embrace into whispered confessions against his shoulder. But soon the barriers between them crumbled completely. They made love with the urgency of two people who had been starved of tenderness for too long. For Margaret, it was a rediscovery of her body, her desire, her capacity to feel alive. For Daniel, it was both triumph and surrender, the journalist who had once dissected her husband's legacy now bound to his widow with an intimacy no article could ever capture. In those nights, passion blurred into tenderness. He traced the lines of her face as if memorizing them. She whispered stories from her girlhood, things no one else knew. Together, they created a fragile cocoon, a universe where age, power, and politics did not exist. The illusion of safety. But outside those walls, reality loomed. Margaret still appeared at public events, her every smile photographed, her every word dissected. Daniel still published sharp articles, his reputation as a relentless critic growing. To the world, they were adversaries. To each other, they were sanctuary. And yet, the illusion of safety was brittle. Each time Margaret left the townhouse, she felt the air tighten. Did her driver suspect? Did her staff notice? The nation adored her as a grieving widow. What would they say if they saw her stepping into the arms of a younger man, a man who had once torn her husband apart in print? The thought should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, it thrilled her. For the first time in years, she was living, not merely existing. Conversations between sheets. They did not just share bodies, they shared secrets. Late at night, wrapped in tangled sheets, they spoke of things they could not tell the world. I sometimes wonder, Margaret confessed softly, if Charles ever really knew me. Or if I was just part of the stage set of his presidency. Daniel brushed his lips against her hand. He may have had the country, but he never had you, not the way I do. The words both soothed and frightened her. She wanted to believe them, needed to. Yet deep down, a voice whispered that nothing in her life could ever be simple again. The first risk. Their secrecy began to fray one evening when Margaret's driver, an old family loyalist, lingered too long outside the townhouse. When she emerged, her hair slightly mussed, her cheeks flushed, his eyes flicked to hers with quiet disapproval. He said nothing, but the silence spoke volumes. That night, Margaret lay awake beside Daniel, her heart pounding. "It's only a matter of time," she whispered. "Then let time come," Daniel said firmly, pulling her close. "We'll face it." But Margaret knew better. The world was not kind to widows who dared to love again, least of all when that love was scandalous. The thrill and the fear. Each meeting grew more reckless. A touch too long at a public event. A note slipped into her handbag by his hand. A night where she stayed later than she should have, returning home at dawn. The thrill burned in her veins, but so did the fear. She felt as if she were dancing on a tightrope, exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. Sometimes, when Daniel held her, she let herself imagine a future where they could walk openly together. A future where she was no longer bound to her husband's ghost, where she could be simply Margaret and he, simply Daniel. But in the morning light, reality always returned. She was not just a woman. She was the president's widow. And her choices carried the weight of a nation's judgment. The moment of realization. One evening, as rain pattered against the townhouse windows, Margaret stood by the fire while Daniel poured wine. She turned to him, her voice low but certain. "This us, it cannot last." Daniel froze, the glass in his hand. "Because of what people will say? Because of who I am. Because of who you are. We're building something beautiful on quicksand." He crossed the room in 2 strides, setting the glass aside. "Then let it sink. I don't care about the world, Margaret. I care about you." His words broke through her defenses. She let him kiss her, let the fire crackle as they surrendered to each other again. But even as passion consumed her, a small part of her heart whispered the truth. Danger had found them. And it was only a matter of time before the world did too. No affair, however carefully hidden, can stay secret forever. In Washington, where every glance is noted and every whisper carried, even the smallest clue can ignite suspicion. For Margaret and Daniel, the shadows that once protected them were beginning to thin. The first rumors. It started quietly. A reporter from a society column noticed Margaret slipping away early from a charity dinner, on the same night Daniel Pierce failed to appear at a scheduled press gathering. A senator's wife mentioned to her friend that she had seen Margaret laughing with Daniel at a museum, too intimately for comfort. Within weeks, the whispers multiplied. The president's widow, and the critic who despised him. For now, they were only rumors. But rumors in Washington are like sparks in dry grass. Once they catch, they spread faster than anyone can stop. The magazine photograph. The first real crack came in the form of a photograph. Margaret and Daniel had been reckless, walking together through Dumbarton Oaks Gardens just after sunset. She wore a scarf over her hair, hoping anonymity would cloak her, but her face was unmistakable. A freelance photographer sold the image to a gossip magazine. The editors debated, cautious about offending the legacy of President Ellison. But scandal sells, and within a week the picture appeared in glossy print under the headline, "The Widow's Companion, Friend or Something More?" Margaret's staff rushed to dismiss it. A baseless rumor, they told the press. A casual acquaintance. But the seed had been planted. And the nation, fascinated by the glamorous widow, began to watch her more closely. The backlash begins. Letters flooded her office. Some were sympathetic, urging her to find happiness again. Others dripped with venom. "How dare you dishonor Charles's memory?" one woman scrawled in angry ink. "You belong to the people, not to some young opportunist," another letter read. At luncheons, Margaret felt the stares of women who once admired her. At board meetings, her allies shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to be linked with her rumored scandal. She had carried herself for years as a symbol of dignity. Now, that dignity was unraveling. Daniel under fire. Daniel, too, faced the fire. His editor pulled him into a tense meeting. "You're making enemies in this town already, Pierce. If these rumors are true, if you're involved with her, you're finished. No one will trust a journalist who sleeps with his subjects." Daniel met the accusation head-on. "My work speaks for itself." But even as he said it, he knew the danger. His credibility, everything he had fought to build, could be shattered by his love for Margaret. And yet when he left the office that night, his feet carried him not home, but back to the townhouse where she waited. A confrontation. One evening, Margaret's eldest daughter, Catherine, confronted her. "Mother," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and anger, "the papers, the whispers, tell me their lies." Margaret froze. Her instinct was to deny, to protect. But when she met her daughter's eyes, she found she could not. Instead she whispered, "I deserve to live, Catherine. I deserve to love." Her daughter's face hardened. "Not like this. Not with him. You'll destroy everything father built." The words cut deep. For the first time, Margaret wondered if she was not only risking her own reputation but tearing apart her family's faith as well. The lovers' argument. That night, she stormed into the townhouse, tears burning in her eyes. Daniel found her pacing, her hands shaking. "They'll ruin me," she said. "My children, my friends, the nation. No one will forgive this." Daniel reached for her, but she pulled away. "Do you understand what it means for me? I am not free, Daniel. I never was. My life belongs to them. Every step, every breath, every word, scrutinized, judged." His voice rose, more fierce than she had ever heard it. "Then take it back. Don't live for them, live for yourself." "You don't understand," she shot back. "You're young, you can afford to be reckless. I cannot." Silence fell, heavy and sharp. For the first time, the gulf between them yawned wide. A fragile embrace. And yet, as the night deepened, Margaret collapsed into his arms, her sobs muffled against his chest. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "You won't," Daniel vowed. "No matter what they say, I'm here." But even as he held her, both of them knew the truth. The public eye was no longer a distant threat. It was here watching, circling closer each day. Their love had crossed the threshold from secret to scandal. And scandals, once born, are impossible to contain. Symbols are fragile things. They gleam under the light of admiration, but one crack, one flaw exposed, and the entire illusion shatters. For years, Margaret Ellison had been a symbol, the grieving widow, the graceful first lady who carried her husband's legacy like a crown of thorns. But now, that symbol was breaking. And the world was watching. The headline that changed everything. It began with a headline splashed across the Sunday papers. "The President's Widow in Secret Affair?" The story cited anonymous sources, detailed sightings at the townhouse, hinted at midnight rendezvous. Worst of all, it printed the photograph, the one from Dumbarton Oaks, where Daniel's hand had brushed hers as they walked. The image spoke louder than words. By noon, the phones at Margaret's Georgetown home were ringing non-stop. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, cameras flashing, microphones shoved at her staff. Neighbors peered through curtains. Washington buzzed like a hive set aflame. The nation's widow was no longer untouchable. She was a woman accused. The public reaction. Some voices were sympathetic. Letters arrived from women who confessed they understood her loneliness, who told her to follow your heart. But most were vicious. "You disgrace his memory," one note spat. "Shame on you, Margaret Ellison. America deserved better from its first lady," another sneered. On radio talk shows, pundits debated whether she had betrayed not just her husband, but the nation itself. In church pulpits, preachers thundered about morality. Her image, once untouchable, was now the subject of mockery and condemnation. Family betrayal. The hardest blow came from within her own family. Her son Andrew, a congressman rising in his own career, came to her home, his face pale with fury. "Mother, do you realize what you've done? My colleagues are whispering, the party is furious. Father's name is being dragged through the mud because of you." Margaret's voice cracked. "Andrew, I loved your father. I honored him. But he is gone. Am I to remain a statue forever?" Andrew's jaw tightened. "Yes, if the alternative is this. You are not just a woman. You are his legacy. And now you've destroyed it." The words cut deeper than any headline. For the first time, Margaret wondered if love was worth the cost of her children's respect. Daniel under siege. Daniel's world collapsed too. His editor suspended him, citing conflicts of interest. His colleagues whispered behind his back. "You're a fool, Pierce," one said. "Sleeping with the widow of the very president you attacked? You've ended your career." Daniel pretended not to care, but the humiliation burned. He had always thrived on being a critic, a truth-teller. Now, he was painted as a parasite, a man who seduced power for personal gain. Still, when he looked at Margaret, he could not regret it. She was worth the storm. The breaking point. The pressure mounted until Margaret could barely breathe. The foundation boards threatened to remove her as patron. Invitations to events were quietly rescinded. Once adoring socialites crossed the street to avoid her. At night, she sat in her darkened townhouse, staring at the headlines, the angry letters, the empty silence of her home. Daniel arrived one evening, his face weary, his voice desperate. "Come away with me," he said. "Leave Washington. We'll go to New York, Paris, anywhere. We don't need them." Margaret shook her head, tears welling. "You don't understand. I am them. I can't run from it. My life will always belong to their judgment." Daniel grasped her hands. "No. Your life belongs to you. To us." But Margaret's silence was heavy. She wanted to believe him, but she could not escape the truth. She was not free. A mirror cracked. One morning, she stood before her mirror, the same mirror where she had once adjusted her pearls before White House dinners. Now, the reflection staring back at her looked older, wearier, broken. For the first time, she whispered aloud, "They will never forgive me." Her image, her crown, her shield, was shattered. And behind it, she no longer knew who she was. The nation waits. As summer drew on, the scandal did not fade. It grew. Investigations into her finances began. Columnists speculated about Daniel's influence over her decisions. Allies distanced themselves. The president's widow was no longer a saint. She was scandal incarnate. And somewhere in the wreckage, Margaret realized she faced a choice: cling to the ruins of her dignity, or risk everything for a love the world had already condemned. Every scandal eventually reaches its boiling point. For Margaret Ellison, that moment came when the storm outside grew louder than her heartbeat, when she could no longer hide in the townhouse or behind polite smiles at charity dinners. The world demanded an answer. Was she a grieving widow still devoted to her late husband's legacy, or a woman daring to claim her own life? She could not be both. The meeting with the board. The Ellison Foundation had been her sanctuary, her way of carrying Charles's work forward. But even there, the whispers had infected the walls. The board called an emergency meeting. Men in dark suits, women in pearls, faces that had once smiled warmly at her now looked stern, almost cold. "Mrs. Ellison," the chairman began, "your involvement with Mr. Pierce has become untenable. Donors are withdrawing. The press coverage is damaging our work. We urge you, for the good of the foundation, to end this relationship publicly." Margaret's hands trembled under the polished table. She wanted to protest, to remind them she had given her heart to this cause. But their eyes told her the truth: she was no longer Margaret, the benefactor. She was the scandal. When the meeting ended, she sat alone in her car, staring at the Jefferson Memorial through the window. Even here, she thought, I am reduced to someone's widow, someone's mistake. Daniel's plea. That night in the townhouse, Daniel found her sitting by the window, her face pale in the moonlight. "They want me to give you up," she whispered. "And what do you want?" he asked. Her eyes closed. "I don't know anymore." Daniel knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Margaret, listen to me. For months, you've told me how trapped you feel, how you've lived as a symbol instead of a woman. This is our chance to break free. Let them talk. Let them rage. None of it matters if we have each other." His words were fierce, but his voice softened. "I love you. Isn't that enough?" Her heart ached. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to throw the entire world away and follow him into the unknown. But she also saw Andrew's angry face, Catherine's disappointment, the eyes of the nation judging her every move. "Sometimes love is not enough," she whispered. Daniel flinched as if struck. A visit to the grave. 2 days later, Margaret drove to Arlington Cemetery, where Charles rested beneath the eternal flame. Tourists gathered quietly nearby, snapping photographs, whispering about the legacy of a president gone too soon. She knelt by the grave, her gloved hand brushing the cool stone. "Charles," she murmured, "they still want me to be yours. Even now, when you're gone. They say I betray you by wanting to live again. Did you ever feel the same, trapped, suffocated by what they wanted you to be?" The flame flickered in the breeze, offering no answer. Tears blurred her vision. "I loved you. I honored you. But I cannot live forever as your statue." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Forgive me." The breaking point. That evening, Margaret invited Daniel to her Georgetown home, not the secret townhouse, but her own house, filled with portraits of Charles, photographs of their family, artifacts of a life she could no longer carry. Daniel looked uneasy as he entered. "Why here?" "Because I cannot keep hiding," she said. They sat together in the living room, the silence heavy. Margaret finally spoke, her words trembling. "I cannot deny what you mean to me. You make me feel alive, seen, loved. But every step we take together tears down the life I've built, the memory of the man I buried. My children despise me, the nation condemns me, and I am drowning." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So this is goodbye?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I only know that I cannot be both, the widow and the lover. I must choose. Love or legacy." The choice hung between them like a blade. Daniel rose, his voice sharp with pain. "I will not be your secret shame, Margaret. If you want me, choose me. If not, end it now." Margaret's chest tightened. She wanted to shout, "I choose you." She wanted to run into his arms, to let the world burn. But instead, silence filled the room. Daniel waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Then, with anguish in his eyes, he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. Margaret collapsed into her chair, her sobs echoing in the empty house. She had not chosen. And yet, by not choosing, she feared she had already lost him. A widow in the mirror. Later that night, Margaret stood before her mirror once again. Her reflection looked broken, half a woman, half a monument. "I cannot live like this," she whispered. But whether she meant living as Charles's widow, or living without Daniel, she could not yet say. The nation waited for her decision. Her family waited. Daniel waited. And Margaret Ellison, for the first time in her life, realized that the choice was hers alone. Whispers can be ignored. Rumors can be denied. But when truth splashes across headlines, there is no escape. For Margaret Ellison, the morning her world collapsed began like any other: a pot of tea, the Washington Post at her doorstep, the quiet hum of Georgetown streets. But when she unfolded the paper, her hands froze. There, in bold letters across the front page: "The President's Widow and the Journalist, Secret Affair Exposed." And beneath it, photographs, grainy but undeniable. Margaret entering the townhouse late at night. Daniel leaving the next morning, collar undone, eyes downcast. A timeline of their meetings, quotes from anonymous sources, and the cruel sentence that struck like a blade. What began as debates over legacy has turned into the most shocking romance Washington has ever seen. The world reacts. By midday, the story had spread everywhere, on every television channel, every radio broadcast, every gossip magazine. News anchors spoke with hushed scandal: the nation's most revered widow caught in a forbidden affair. Columnists sneered, from First Lady to fallen woman. Crowds gathered outside her home, flashing cameras blinding her windows. Journalists shouted questions as she stepped outside. "Mrs. Ellison, do you deny the relationship? Are you betraying your husband's memory? Mr. Pierce, is this love or ambition?" The White House, though no longer hers, issued a carefully worded statement: "We respect Mrs. Ellison's private life, though we regret the distraction this story has caused." Regret. Not support. Not defense. Just regret. The children's anger. Her daughter Catherine refused to take her calls. Her son Andrew released a statement: "My father's legacy must not be tarnished. This is a painful time for our family." The words sliced through her heart. They had not spoken them to her face, but to the nation, aligning themselves not with their mother, but with the ghost of their father. Margaret sat in her silent living room, the portraits of Charles staring down at her, and for the first time she wondered if she had lost her children forever. Daniel's trial by fire. Daniel fared no better. His editor fired him outright. Colleagues mocked him in bars, whispering that he had traded his pen for her bed. The public painted him as a vulture, using Margaret for fame, betraying the memory of the president he had once criticized. But through the smoke and fury, Daniel's resolve only sharpened. He stormed into Margaret's townhouse one night, his eyes blazing. "Let them talk," he said. "Let them hate me. I don't care. But you can't hide anymore. You must decide. Do you stand with me, or do you let them break us apart?" Margaret trembled. His passion filled the room, his love undeniable. But so was the weight of the world pressing against her chest. The public trial. Days turned into weeks, each one heavier than the last. Margaret could not step outside without being mobbed. The foundation cut ties with her. Old friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. She became, overnight, the most controversial woman in America. On a Sunday morning, she slipped into a small chapel, hoping for silence. Instead, whispers filled the pews. A woman muttered, "There she is." Another hissed, "Shame." Margaret bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. Even God's house was no refuge. The breaking interview. Finally, a network anchor, an old acquaintance, offered her a chance to speak. "If you want to defend yourself, do it on air," he said. The studio lights burned bright as Margaret sat before the cameras, her black dress severe, her pearl necklace trembling against her throat. The interviewer leaned forward. "Mrs. Ellison, the nation wants to know, are the rumors true? Are you in love with Daniel Pierce?" Silence stretched. Margaret's pulse thundered in her ears. She could deny. She could protect the legacy, cling to the image, bury the truth. Or she could speak. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "Yes. I love him." Gasps filled the studio. The interviewer blinked, stunned. The declaration raced across headlines within the hour. "The widow speaks, I love him." The aftermath. The backlash was swift and merciless. Politicians condemned her. Religious leaders denounced her. Former allies abandoned her. But something else happened too. Letters began to arrive, not of hate, but of quiet solidarity. Women wrote of their own loneliness, their own desires buried by duty. Widows confessed that they too had yearned for love beyond grief. "You are brave," one letter read. "You are selfish," another countered. Margaret read them all, her heart torn between pride and shame. The storm before the calm. As autumn leaves began to fall, Margaret and Daniel stood together on the steps of her townhouse, cameras flashing, reporters shouting. Daniel squeezed her hand. "We can leave. We can start over. Just say the word." Margaret looked out at the crowd, the fury, the fascination, the unblinking eyes of a nation that had once adored her. For the first time, she did not flinch. Her life was no longer her husband's, no longer the nation's. It was hers. Whether she had the strength to keep it, that was the question that would define the rest of her days. Autumn swept through Washington, crisp winds rattling the leaves along Pennsylvania Avenue. 6 months had passed since the scandal broke, 6 months since Margaret Ellison's confession, "Yes, I love him," echoed through television screens and living rooms across America. The world had not forgiven her. But neither had she asked for forgiveness. Life in the ashes. Her life was unrecognizable. The Ellison Foundation had replaced her. The charities that once clamored for her presence no longer called. Her children remained distant, Catherine writing only short, cold letters, Andrew avoiding her entirely. Friends who had once filled her calendar were gone. The grand dinners, the glittering galas, the soft applause of admirers, all of it had evaporated. She was alone. Or almost. Because through every headline, every jeer, every slammed door, Daniel Pierce remained. Daniel's devotion. They lived quietly now, in a modest apartment away from Georgetown's watchful eyes. Daniel, though stripped of his position, continued to write, columns published by smaller presses, essays circulated among young radicals who admired his fire. "Let them think what they want," he told her often. "History will decide who we were, not them." Sometimes Margaret believed him. Other times, she wondered if history would paint her as nothing more than a foolish widow who destroyed her legacy for love. But when he touched her hand, when he spoke to her not as a symbol but as a woman, she felt the stirrings of something greater than reputation, freedom. A return to Arlington. One gray afternoon, Margaret returned alone to Arlington Cemetery. The flame at Charles Ellison's grave flickered in the wind. Tourists lingered nearby, whispering, pointing. Some looked at her with pity, others with disdain. She knelt by the stone, her gloved hand pressing against the cold marble. "I've lived in your shadow long enough," she whispered. "I carried your name, your image, your burdens. I loved you, but I will not let you chain me in death as you did in life." Her voice trembled, but her words did not falter. "I choose me." The speech. Weeks later, an invitation arrived, unexpected, almost shocking. A women's university asked Margaret to speak at their commencement ceremony. Her advisors, what few remained, urged her to decline. "The backlash will be worse," they warned. "They'll mock you." But Margaret accepted. On the day of the ceremony, she stood before hundreds of young women, her black dress simple, her pearls gone. The crowd hushed as she began. "For many years, I lived as an image," she said. "The president's wife. The president's widow. A symbol others shaped for their own comfort. But I stand before you now not as a symbol, but as a woman. A woman who has made mistakes, yes. A woman who has loved, who has lost, who has been judged. But also a woman who has chosen to live." Her voice strengthened. "Do not let the world trap you in roles you did not choose. You are not monuments. You are not shadows. You are flesh and blood and fire. You deserve to be seen." The audience erupted in applause, not polite, not restrained but fierce. Some wept. Some cheered. For the first time since the scandal, Margaret felt something shift. Not acceptance. Not absolution. But respect, raw and real. A widow no more. That night, Margaret and Daniel sat together on their balcony, the city lights flickering beyond. He poured wine, and she leaned against him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "You were brilliant today," he whispered. "I was honest," she replied. He kissed her temple. Honest is what they'll remember. Margaret gazed at the city where she had once been a queen, then a pariah. Now she was something else entirely, not defined by Charles, not defined by scandal, but by her own choices. The president's widow, she said softly, almost to herself. That's what they called me. Daniel tilted his head. And now? She smiled faintly. Now, I am Margaret Ellison. Nothing more. Nothing less. Epilogue. History would debate her forever. Some would call her reckless. Others, courageous. Some would say she betrayed a legacy. Others, that she carved her own. But for Margaret, history's verdict no longer mattered. She had chosen love. She had chosen herself. And in the quiet of a Washington evening, with Daniel's arm around her and her heart no longer bound to ghosts, she was at last what she had always longed to be. Free.